I'm not going to lie to you, this case made me furious, not just as a mother, but as an academic and as a human being. Everything about this case absolutely infuriates me, and it was very, very challenging to look at this case through an objective academic lens whilst doing the research and whilst writing about this topic. It was so challenging because it's a story that blurs the lines between partner and parent, guilt and justice, and it makes you question, how did we even get here? Welcome back to True Crime and Tea, or welcome to True Crime and Tea, where we don't just spill the tea on chilling true crime cases, we unpack the evidence, question the narratives, and stir in a healthy dose of critical thinking. I'm your host Lele, and I am a previous lecturer, a researcher, and an unapologetic true crime lover. Here we do things a little bit differently, where every case is a case study. Every victim, every system, and every suspect gets examined with an academic lens. Think criminology meets ethics, psychology meets media critique, and you're here to learn how to read between the lines. Grab your tea, your notes, and your curiosity, because this is where true crime gets critical. So, October 2018 in Galveston, Texas, Tiandra Piston told the police that her 2-year-old daughter, Hazana Anderson, had vanished at Gabbard Park while she stepped away just for a minute. And then she said when she returned, the stroller was there, but her daughter was gone. A huge search then followed, with over 160 people joining to help search for little Hazana. Volunteers combed the area in the park, but something just felt off. I wonder why. Witnesses had said they hadn't seen a child, but then police found something that was absolutely chilling. They found a life-sized doll dressed in the same clothes that Tiandra had described Hazana as wearing when she had gone missing, and they found these clothes in a nearby trash can, a nearby rubbish bin. What she had been doing is she had been carrying this doll around in the stroller in public for days. She had been pretending that this doll was her baby. As a mother, this is where I have had to pause, because at this point, this isn't just grief, this isn't panic, this is fabrication. It's deception and it's manipulation, and I really want that to sit with us and see what that tells us, because there is some thought that went behind putting this doll in the same clothes that she had claimed her daughter to be in when she went missing, and not just for a couple of hours, but for days she was walking around with that doll in the stroller. Eventually, Tiandra confessed that Hazana had died days earlier while she and her boyfriend, Kenny Hewitt, were staying at a hotel. According to her account, they beat the child with a belt because she wouldn't stop crying. She said that the baby Hazana had slipped in and out of consciousness, and when she had gone unconscious, she had then tried to revive her by throwing cold water on her. Sorry, that's not exactly what it says. What it says is she had tried to revive her with cold water. Then she used a hairdryer to warm her up. Tiandra noted that Hazana's body, particularly her anus, looked wrong. Just can't. Because of this, there were implications of SA. Even the medical examiner was not able to fully determine what Hazana's cause of death was. What did that mean for this case, you might ask? What it meant was there was no murder charge. I'll just repeat that for the people in the back. There was no murder charge, only a charge for tampering with a corpse, which is absolutely heartbreaking. Tiandra and Kenny kept Hazana's body in a trash bag in the car for 3 days. Yeah, so the days that she had spent walking around the park with a doll in a stroller in the same clothes that she had claimed Hazana had been wearing when she went missing, for those 3 days, the poor baby was in a bin bag in the boot of their car. Yeah. They then went on to tie a rock to the bag and dumped Hazana in Moses Lake. Tiandra later led the police to where her daughter's remains were, which is then where they were able to look at the body and determine that they couldn't determine what the cause of death was. Therefore, she did not get a murder charge. He did not get a murder charge. They got tampering with a corpse. Let's zoom out, because this is obviously true crime through an academic lens with a little bit of academic tea sprinkled in there. So from the academic perspective, when you look at this through the academic lens, there are 3 things that I would like to pull apart. The first is nurture versus nature. The second is maternal identity and moral disengagement. And the third is the clear justice gap. So let's think about nature versus nurture versus nature. There are many cases that we'll go on to look at where nature versus nurture always seems to crop up. Did they become this person because of society, because they were developed into becoming this person, or were they just born like that? And this is what we need to consider when it comes to Tiandra and Kenny in the case of the death of Hazana. What conditions, particularly for Tiandra, produce a mother who prioritizes her partner over that of her child's life? Because when you look at some of the evidence that was presented, she herself said that when she looked at her daughter, there were parts of her body that looked like they had been troubled. But instead of speaking out against that and protecting her child, which is what she should have done, she prioritized her partner over her child, helping to dispose of a body. So that is one of the things. What was the reason for her to be able to put her partner above her child that she bore for 9 months? Was she predisposed to violence and detachment? That would be nature. The nature would look at this and we'd say, this is just how she was. She was a person, her natural self was predisposed to violence and disengagement. It was easy for her to just detach from the situation. Or was she shaped into this person by the system, by neglect, by abuse, or by toxic relational dynamics? That would be the nurture side. Was this person that she had turned into, was this a development over time? I'll leave that question to you because I just think she's evil. So that's nature versus nurture. The second was the maternal identity and moral disengagement. There is this assumption that when you have a child, you're automatically maternal, right? So how do women dissociate from the natural maternal role so completely? She seemed so detached and so disengaged from things that contributed to the death of her child, whether it was proven in court or not. She was so detached from it that it seemed easy for her to just replace her daughter with a doll. How does that happen? And again, there are a number of cases that we're going to look at where you have to question why is it so easy, and how is it so easy for that maternal disengagement, detachment? Why and how is it possible for a mother to just completely take herself out of the position of being a mother and cause harm to her children? Studies on maternal filicide, which is what this is called, the killing of one's own child, shows that perpetrators often rationalize their actions by dehumanizing the child or displacing responsibility onto others, both of which we can see in this case. She dehumanized her daughter by replacing her with a doll, but then also put the responsibility onto the partner, saying, you know, when you look at the case, he's the reason why she died. They both beat her, but he did extra things to her, which is probably a contribution to why she died. But also the fact that they found it so easy to beat her because she was making noise. The maternal disengagement was there again. And there are other cases, like the case of Andrea Yates, who referred to her children as it wasn't the spawns of the devil, but she believed that they were evil, so she was able to do certain things to her children, and we'll look into that case in another episode. But many of these cases of filicide, the mother dehumanizes the child. They're no longer human, and it's very, very evident in this case with Tiandra pushing her child around in a stroller, but the child wasn't her child, it was a dolly. That is not human. It was easy for her to do that, which then it goes back to the idea of nurture. Has society created this detachment in her where her mental health and her psyche just completely broke, where she was no longer able to see her child as human? Another question that I will leave to you to answer in the comments. The third point that I wanted to look at was the justice gap. There is a glaring justice gap here. Nobody got charged with first degree murder, second degree murder, manslaughter. Nobody got charged for taking the life of this child. Hazana did not get justice. And when you consider the fact that they could have even been charged with manslaughter and that wasn't even on the table, is wild to me. They did get 20 years, but that's 20 years for tampering, not the taking of one's life. Just moving the body from one place to another, that's tampering. That gap, just ethically, how can someone live with the idea that this person's quite clearly gotten away with murder? We know that they did it. It's very obvious that they did it. So why did they not get charged with that? The gap between moral guilt and legal guilt is something that is often ignored, but we need to question. We need to ask, when the cause of death is undetermined, do we have the right forensic tools to protect children like Hazana? And we know that over the years, science has contributed a lot to solving cold cases and unsolved mysteries. There was one very recently where a grandmother was convicted through ancestry DNA, that, you know, when you put your DNA through ancestry.com or wherever it is, and you try and find out where you're from, and then it links you to people. A grandmother was found guilty of a murder of her child that happened in the 80s. Do I think it's right that they collect your information and use it this way? No. However, science has advanced so much that where there wasn't DNA back in the 80s, when the crime was committed, 80s, 90s when it was committed, because of the advances in science, there is now the right forensic tool to be able to hold this person accountable for the crime that they've committed. So consideration needs to go into funding. For example, is there enough funding to do the research to be able to develop the tools that can support in cases like this? And would there have been a difference if we did have the right tools? Would this have been a murder charge instead of just tampering? So this story is not just about a broken woman, which I don't personally think she was a broken woman. I think she's evil, and her partner is quite clearly a violent one. But it's about how motherhood isn't always sacred, and how the criminal justice system fails the smallest victims. Hazana was completely failed by the justice system, purely on on the fact that they couldn't determine through forensics whether or not they had taken their life. There are many arguments that could be had to prove that they probably contributed. However, in this case, this small victim was not given the justice that she deserved. And then it also gets us to think about how community trauma and systems intersect in absolutely terrifying ways. This is an awful situation. But then this is where I can ask my academic mamas, how do we as scholars, as mothers, and as caregivers make sense of this? It's very, very challenging to be objective and look at two sides of the story, which I don't think I've done much in this episode, because I just think she's evil. I can't look at it objectively. Nature versus nurture. Okay, maybe she was nurtured into this person, but how do you become so detached from the child that you held inside you for 9 months? Or not everyone holds them for 9 months. Mine was early, but you held them in your body for that long. The invisible string is always there. How do you become so disengaged? But again, it's another question on how do we teach about the failures in safeguarding without becoming desensitized? Because it's very, very... Once you become desensitized, then cases like this, I guess, become easier to look at objectively. But then what does that say about us as people? I don't know. Because while Hazana's case is rare, thankfully, it's not an isolated case though. We know there are other cases where there has been filicide and where young lives have not been held as sacred, and where the justice system has failed these young people. So the questions we ask ourselves: how do we as mothers, as scholars, as caregivers, how do we make sense of this situation, and how do we teach about the failures in safeguarding without becoming desensitized? Let me know your thoughts in the comments of what you think of this case. This is a conversation that shouldn't stop here. As always, if this episode resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so you know when the next episode is released. Until next time, protect your babies, protect your boundaries, and never be afraid to ask questions. Bye, I'll see you next time.